ESPN.com today, Bill Connelly and also Dave Wilson. 5 questions ahead of Big 12 Media Days. Paul, you had that as a part of your top 5 to end the show on Monday. And Bill joins us now on 365 Sports with Craig and Paul, and I'm David Smoak. So how much of everything initially was just dominated by waiting for what Brett Yormark might say, no matter what it is?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. We know he enjoys having a little attention on him and being able to say big, bold things. And the Big 12 is certainly acting pretty boldly at the moment. So it should be pretty entertaining. We never quite learn all that much at these things. It's more about just learning what the Big 12 wants us to be thinking about. But it will be kind of interesting in that regard, if nothing else.
Bill, do you expect him to have a little bit of a bombshell, or do you expect it to be what he's normally done, where he's very good at teasing something right up to the edge of actually having an answer?
Right. I mean, if he's the one guy who would actually try to come up with a bombshell and announce Colorado and UConn and whatever else, but probably not. I do. It's just going to be we're looking to be aggressive and kind of the catchphrases that we heard last year and that we've heard a lot since. I mean, again, I think we're kind of stuck in terms of who they can add and whatnot until we know about the Pac-12 deal, which apparently we'll learn something about in the next 12 years or so. But that's. I mean, we won't know anything about Colorado. I guess, if UConn's ready to jump, but I don't think they are. So I think it's just going to be a lot of talk about being aggressive and creative and so on and so forth.
Interesting times, Bill. 4 brand new schools. They were kind of around representatives last year to sort of check things out. But, I mean, now in full. But, of course, the 2 that will be departing, and that was one of your notes here was what's kind of the treatment of Texas and Oklahoma. What do you expect, and just how much do you expect that to take up the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be disappointed if Mike Gundy doesn't have a couple more one-liners to get us through. But I do think, now that we're close to the end here, and now that they have to feel pretty good about the moves they've made. I mean, they added 4 good programs. 3 of them, it's gonna take them a little while, I think, to get up to speed. 3 of them kind of took a backward step last year, and we'll see exactly how they can, account for that. But overall, they've added 4 really good programs, and I think they'll try to spin everything toward look at this is going to be such a fun conference in the future. And TCU just won the Big 12 college football playoff game, and they're staying. They're not OU or Texas. So there's plenty of spin forward that they can do. I think we're going to see a lot of that.
4 teams coming in, 2 that will have their last Big 12 media days. Which will be more dominant, the theme of the incoming 4, which I think, in my opinion, it will be, or the fact Texas and OU are leaving?
Yeah, I think it will be. It is kind of awkward, too, though, because Texas is the favorite this year. And so I do think it'll be kind of, we'll merge some storylines together here. Yes, Texas is leaving, but also can they actually live up to hype on the way out the door? So that's kind of created a secondary storyline for us over the summer months. But no, I think it will definitely be, they all got jabbed at OU and Texas last year, Gundy and whoever else probably will again this year. But for the most part, I think they'll be trying to spin this forward because it does look like a pretty fun future, and they might as well, try to sell that.
Bill, you guys mentioned you particularly mentioned the close games in how this Big 12 flipped from 2021 to 2022 in the top 5. Do you expect to see that trend continue this year in the Big 12?
I think so. I mean, obviously, if Texas, there's a lot to like about Texas, and maybe they're a step ahead of everybody else. They're going to have to be because they're not good in close games and haven't been for a little while. But the way this conference has gone the last couple of years, yeah, it's whoever goes 6-1 in those 1-score games, or 4-1 or whatever. And TCU and Kansas State both did really, really well in that regard. K State was the only team to beat TCU in one of those games last year. And it's just it's so hard to do that twice. We saw that with Baylor and Oklahoma State last year. Just all the little breaks that you got late, or some of you created for yourself, and then others, the bounces went correctly. It's really hard for those bounces to go right 2 straight years and you fall back. So I'm curious about TCU in that regard. Curious about K-State. They weren't quite as close game dependent. But I'm also curious about Texas Tech, like I mentioned in the piece. They improved last year. They're projected to, or they're picked to improve even further. They were 4-1, I think, in 1-score games last year. Converted a ton of 4th downs, and we saw from Baylor last year that can backfire on you a little bit sometimes too.
Bill, you pointed out as far as the newcomers, I know you kind of just touched on it a second ago as well, but UCF kind of seems to be the favorite there. But just what are your thoughts on Holgorsen and Houston and kind of that whole situation? I would think after winning 8 games, a guy wouldn't be on a hot seat, but it sure sounds like he's still on a hot seat of sorts.
Yeah, it's funny with Houston. I mean, once they get a taste of success like that, they really like. It's really hard to take a step backwards. I guess that's a lot of programs in the end. But yeah, with what we saw in 2021 with Houston taking a humongous step forward, still scoring a lot of points, but suddenly having one of the better defenses in the group of 5 as well. It really looked like all the arrows were pointing in the right direction. And then last year, even with decent experience on the defensive side of the ball, it completely fell apart. They had the old Holgorsen defense again. So that's really hard to figure out what to. They have. They brought in some good transfers. Overall, I think that'll be pretty good. But was 2021 just a flash in the pan kind of deal, or can they actually repeat it? They're gonna score points, especially. I have no doubt about that. But yeah, the defense is going to determine whether they're fighting for 10th place in the conference or something better.
Bill, one of the underrated parts of the Big 12, at least I've always felt this way, is that yes, they've had alpha names. Some have left, and now Texas and Oklahoma are about to. But the league is incredibly competitive. And now with Kansas rising out of the ashes, who knows? What? Because they were always their 10th, their 10th, their 10th. But now you have 14 teams. Is the competitiveness of the actual conference week in and week out something you think is nationally underrated?
I mean, I love it. I try not to make it nationally underrated, but it quite possibly is. My joke when I'm talking to a Big 12 coach is just like, yeah, this is the conference where every game is decided by 3 points, and it feels like that sometimes. And I tweeted out last week when the media poll came out with the media poll results. I tweeted out like how I would have voted if I was in there, and I had BYU 14th, and of course a lot of BYU fans got mad about that. But I think BYU is like a top 60 team. It's just everybody's a top 60 team, and that's really, really fun. Now, I mean, I realize OU and Texas leave, and your money's not going to be as good as it would have been if they had stayed. But there's a lot you can sell fun in this conference, and you can sell week in, week out, 3-point games and overtimes and all this other stuff. We saw plenty of that last year, and combine that with awesome basketball and awesome softball and lots of other sports. That's a fun conference right there, and they're gonna do just fine for themselves, even if you're not making $100 million a school or whatever it is from these next media rights deals.
Now, look, this might be splitting hairs, but BYU 14th, not West Virginia or Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean you could kind of interchange, I guess, 11th through 14th, really, just like you can kind of interchange 2nd through about 8th. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, looking up and down that roster. I don't trust the new defensive pieces, and I think the offense gets worse, and that's a pretty bad combination. But long term, Houston's obviously always got potential. BYU is well supported. They've been a top 40 program more often than not. So, yeah, I mean, I think long term, all these additions are going to do great. It's just I don't trust BYU's roster very much this first year.
A team that I'm having trouble kind of unpacking. I mean, I think everybody's kind of wait-and-see mode, but Oklahoma State in particular, I don't feel like anybody, and Baylor too to an extent, I feel like people just don't know what to expect one way or the other. But what are your thoughts on Oklahoma State, just because they've been so consistent for so long, and obviously last year got really messy, but, I mean, Gunny's a hell of a coach. What do you kind of unpack with them?
Yeah, it is funny with Baylor and Oklahoma State. They were the darlings 2 years ago, and then they disappointed last year, and we write them off entirely, like 2 years ago didn't happen. But no, I when I write my previews for ESPN.com, and my Big 12 previews went up a couple weeks ago now. I have a general impression, a general thought, and then sometimes when I'm writing the previews, it changes. And with OSU in particular, when coming into the preview, all I knew is they lost a ton of transfers and the quarterback situation was a mess and all this other stuff. But over the course of the preview, I kind of talked myself into them a little bit. If Alan Bowman is still the Alan Bowman we saw at Texas Tech, if he can stay upright for 12, 13 games, that'd be very helpful. But if they've got the quarterback play there, then they've got a lot of the skill core is still pretty good. The defense should improve a lot. Love Kendall Daniels. They still have some of the pieces I really like in the front six. So I do think if the hiring Gannon University's defensive coordinator, if it doesn't require a learning curve for him, defense should improve a lot and they should score a decent amount of points. So I do think I don't know if they're top 2 contender in the conference, but I could definitely see them being about a top 4 contender.
I've seen a couple of images that the Big 12 have tweeted out about, like the entrance onto the field and much more. I think this is not going to be just some random media days. I think that they're setting this thing up to be not Barnum and Bailey, but I think this is going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Look forward to it, Bill. And thank you very much for your time and insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Bill Connelly, ESPN.com. He and Dave Wilson wrote a combo piece on the 5 storylines and their responses to it on questions entering the Big 12 media days. As of now, from what